There was a small town surrounded by hills where the wind often carried the sound of church bells every evening. In one corner of this town stood a tiny house with peeling paint and a little garden filled with wildflowers that grew without care. Inside that house lived a quiet girl named Emily and her mother. Life for them was simple but not easy. Her mother worked long hours at a bakery to make sure they could pay for food and school. Their house was filled with the smell of bread, and in the evenings the sound of an old piano that stood by the window. That piano was not new. It had scratches on its surface and one key that never played right. It had been her father's favorite thing before he passed away years ago. When Emily was younger, she remembered sitting beside him while he played. He would smile and say, "Music doesn't come from fingers, it comes from the heart." Those words stayed in her mind even after he was gone. Now, whenever she touched the piano, it felt like she could still hear his voice guiding her. Most nights, after finishing her homework, Emily would sit on the wooden stool in front of that piano. The street outside would grow quiet, and the only sound was the wind through the open window. She would press one key, then another, and slowly the air would fill with soft notes. She had never learned music from anyone, but she listened to songs on the radio and tried to copy them. Sometimes she got it right, sometimes not, but she never gave up. Her mother often stood at the kitchen door watching her, too tired to speak but smiling at the sight. School was different. Emily was not the kind of girl people noticed. She spoke little, always kept her head down, and stayed close to the back row. The other students were loud and full of confidence. Many of them came from families who could afford music lessons, fancy clothes, and new phones. Emily had none of those. Her shoes were worn out, her bag was secondhand, and her lunch was simple bread most days. Still, she was happy when she could come home and play the piano. Sometimes during lunch break, she would sit near the music room door just to listen to the students who were practicing. The sound of proper instruments made her heart race. She wished she could join them, but she knew she could not afford lessons. One afternoon, as she was sitting there listening, the music teacher, Mr. Harris, noticed her. He was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes. He asked, "You like music, don't you?" Emily nodded shyly. He smiled and said, "You should try playing sometime." She smiled back but didn't say anything. She didn't have the courage to tell him that she already played at home on a piano that was barely alive. That evening, when she got home, she played longer than usual. Her fingers danced across the keys, and though some notes sounded off, the music carried emotion. The stars outside seemed to listen. She imagined herself playing in front of an audience just once, not to show off but to feel that her father's old piano could still speak. The thought made her both excited and scared. She had never played in front of anyone except her mother. Days turned into weeks. The weather turned colder, and the school announced a big event, a yearly talent show. Posters were put up everywhere with bold letters saying, "Show what you've got." Students started talking about what they would perform. Some planned to sing, others to dance, and as always, the star of the music class, Clara, was going to play a piano piece. Clara was known for being the best. She came from a rich family, had private lessons, and everyone admired her skill. Her confidence sometimes came across as pride. When she walked through the hallway, people stepped aside. Emily admired her playing, but always felt she could never be like her. One morning, as the teacher was collecting names for the show, a few students joked about who should or shouldn't join. When the teacher asked if anyone else wanted to participate in the piano section, Clara laughed and said, "No one can beat me there." The class laughed with her. Emily kept her eyes on her notebook, pretending not to hear. But before she knew it, the teacher called her name. "Emily, you like music, don't you? You should sign up." The room went quiet. Emily looked up, her face red. I don't know," she said softly. The teacher smiled kindly. "It doesn't have to be hard. You can play something simple." Clara giggled from the front row. "Yes, simple is good for her," she whispered, and everyone laughed again. That moment burned inside Emily's chest. Simple. The word echoed in her head. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it felt like a wall built between her and the world she loved. After school, she walked home slowly, her head full of thoughts. She didn't tell her mother what happened, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, when she sat down at the piano, she pressed the keys harder than usual. Her music sounded different. It wasn't soft anymore. It was full of power, like something deep inside her had been unlocked. The air in the room seemed alive. Her mother came out of the kitchen and asked, "What's wrong?" Emily shook her head and said quietly, "Nothing, I just want to play." The next morning when she woke up, she found a note on the table. Her mother had signed her up for the talent show. Emily was shocked. "Mom, why?" she asked when her mother returned from work that evening. Her mother wiped her hands on her apron and said, "Because you have something special and people need to hear it." Emily's heart raced. She wasn't sure if she was angry, scared, or happy. The thought of standing in front of the whole school made her feel sick, but somewhere deep down there was also excitement. From that day on, Emily practiced every night. She didn't just play random tunes anymore. She started creating her own melody, something that began gentle and grew stronger, just like her feelings. She wanted it to tell a story, her story. Sometimes she stayed up so late that her mother had to remind her to sleep. Her fingers hurt and the old piano key stuck sometimes, but she kept going. She played until her heart felt lighter. Her mother would sit near the window pretending to read, but she was really listening. The music made her smile. She thought of Emily's father and how proud he would have been. Sometimes when Emily stopped playing, her mother whispered, "He would have loved that." At school, people didn't pay much attention to her, and that was fine. She didn't want them to know she was preparing something. But one afternoon, Clara saw her sitting by the field with a music sheet. "Practicing for the big day?" she asked with a smirk. Emily didn't answer. Clara added, "Don't worry, just play something simple. It'll be cute." She walked away laughing. Emily stared at her paper. The word simple again. She folded the paper and put it in her bag, feeling more determined than ever. The night before the performance, the rain poured hard outside. Emily sat by the piano staring at the keys. She could hear the drops tapping on the window like a rhythm. Her mother came in quietly and placed a warm blanket over her shoulders. "You don't have to win," she said softly. "Just play like you always do. That's enough." Emily looked up and smiled. "I know, Mom, but I want to show them what music really feels like." She practiced one last time that night. The melody started slow, like a whisper, and then grew into something full of fire and emotion. She played until she couldn't feel her fingers. When she finally stopped, she sat there in silence. The rain had stopped. The night was calm. She felt ready. As she lay in bed, she thought about her father. She imagined him sitting beside her again, his hand on her shoulder saying those words she loved so much. "Play what your heart feels, not what the notes say." She smiled, closed her eyes, and let sleep take her. Tomorrow was going to be the day she would play not just a melody, but her soul. Outside, the moon shone softly on the little house with the peeling paint and the wildflowers swaying in the breeze. Inside, the old piano waited, ready to speak again, ready to tell the world the story of a quiet girl who had finally found her sound. The morning of the talent show came with golden sunlight spilling through the curtains. Emily woke up before the alarm went off. Her heart was already racing. She sat on her bed for a moment, her hands pressed together, whispering a small prayer. Her mother had already left for work, but had placed breakfast on the table with a small note that read, "Play with your heart. You'll be wonderful." Emily smiled and folded the note into her pocket as if carrying her mother's words would give her strength through the day. At school, the air was buzzing with excitement. Students carried costumes, instruments, and decorations. The stage in the auditorium was being prepared, lights were being tested, and teachers hurried back and forth with clipboards. Emily walked through the hallway quietly, trying to calm her nerves. A few students looked at her curiously. They had heard she was going to play the piano, and most of them seemed surprised. No one really expected much from her. Some whispered, others laughed softly. She didn't say a word. She just kept walking, clutching her music notebook against her chest. When she peeked into the auditorium, she saw Clara on stage practicing under the bright lights. Her movements were confident and smooth. Her fingers moved across the keys like they were dancing. The sound of her music filled the hall, precise, beautiful, and polished. Everyone who stood around watching her clapped when she finished her run. Emily stayed near the back of the room, unseen, listening. She knew Clara was good. She had always known that. But today, instead of feeling scared, she felt something else, determination. Clara played perfectly, but Emily wanted to play truth. Later, when it was her turn to rehearse, she sat at the same piano Clara had just left. Her hands were trembling. The stage felt too big and the lights too bright. She pressed one key to test it. It sounded crisp and clean, so different from her old piano at home. The teacher nodded at her. "Go ahead, Emily, just a quick run if you want." She nodded and began to play the opening notes of her melody. The sound came out shy and hesitant at first, but soon it softened. Her hands started to move faster, and her mind forgot about everything around her. For those few minutes, it was just her and the piano. When she finished, there was silence. Then the teacher said quietly, "That's lovely, Emily." She looked up, unsure if he meant it, but his kind smile told her he did. The show was set to start in the afternoon. Emily spent lunch alone under a tree outside, going through her notes again and again. She didn't have fancy sheet music like the others, just handwritten scribbles of ideas and lines. She had written parts of her melody by listening to her own heartbeats, the rain outside her window, and the memory of her father's laughter. Every note was personal. Every sound had a story. As she sat there, Clara walked by with her group of friends. They were all laughing, full of energy. When they saw Emily, Clara smiled politely, though her eyes still carried pride. "Ready for your big moment?" she asked. Emily nodded softly. "I think so." Clara tilted her head. "Don't stress too much. Even if it's simple, just play it well." Then she walked away, leaving a trace of perfume in the air. Emily stared at the ground, her heart thumping, but she didn't let the words sting her this time. She had a different kind of fire now. When the final bell rang, the hallways filled with parents, teachers, and students taking their seats in the auditorium. The lights dimmed slowly. The stage glowed. A few students performed songs, dances, and comedy skits. The crowd clapped, laughed, and cheered. Emily sat behind the curtain waiting for her turn. Her hands were cold, her mouth dry. She could hear Clara's performance coming up next. The audience grew silent as she took the stage in a sparkling dress. Her posture was perfect, and the way she bowed made everyone admire her. The first note she played was flawless, and the melody that followed was breathtaking. Every sound echoed with control and grace. The audience watched, completely taken. When she finished, people clapped so hard that it sounded like thunder. Clara stood up and smiled proudly, taking her bow as flowers were handed to her. Emily's stomach turned, but she still clapped along. Then a teacher came to the microphone and said, "And now our next performer, Emily." For a moment, everything felt still. Emily stood up, her legs shaking slightly. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears as she walked toward the stage. The bright lights hit her face, and the crowd looked like a sea of shadows. She took a deep breath and sat down on the piano bench. Her hands rested on her lap for a second as she whispered to herself, "Play what your heart feels." Then she looked at the keys. At first, the sound was soft. The melody began with gentle notes, like a whisper floating through the air. People leaned in to listen. She closed her eyes and let the music lead her. She remembered the nights at home, the smell of her mother's bread, the sound of rain on the window, her father's voice telling her to listen to her heart. Slowly, her hands began to move faster. The melody changed. It grew stronger, louder, more emotional. It wasn't just a tune anymore. It was a story. Each note carried a feeling: hope, pain, love, and courage. Her fingers moved with purpose, not perfection, but passion. The soft part became fire. The crowd sat still, their eyes fixed on her. Clara watched from the front row, her confident smile fading. The teacher who once told Emily to keep it simple now leaned forward in surprise. The principal whispered something to another teacher, both astonished. Even the lights seemed to dim slightly, as if to let the music speak louder. Emily lost herself completely. She didn't think of fear, judgment, or comparison anymore. It was just her heart speaking through the keys. When the final note came, it was quiet and long, hanging in the air like a sigh. She lifted her hands and looked up. The hall was silent for a second that felt like forever. Then suddenly applause broke out, loud, sincere, unstoppable. The audience stood up. Some clapped, some whistled. Emily froze for a second, her eyes wide. Then she smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. She stood and gave a small bow. Her mother, who had managed to sneak into the back of the hall after work, wiped her eyes, clapping the hardest. Emily walked off the stage shaking, her heart full. Backstage, Clara approached her. For a moment, neither said anything. Then Clara smiled, this time softly and honestly. "That was beautiful," she said. Emily nodded. "Thank you." There was no pride in her voice, just calm. Clara hesitated, then added, "You played like It really meant something. Emily smiled again and whispered, "It did." When the show ended, the teachers called all the performers on stage. The judges announced the winners. When they said Emily's name as the winner of the music performance, she stood frozen for a moment. The crowd cheered again. She walked up slowly, her heart pounding, and accepted the small golden trophy with both hands. She didn't say anything, but her smile spoke everything. Her teacher patted her shoulder, whispering, "You made us proud." She looked toward the audience and saw her mother standing, clapping, with tears streaming down her face. Emily waved shyly, her heart swelling. That night when they got home, her mother placed the trophy on top of the old piano. "It belongs there," she said softly. Emily sat down and touched the keys. "It's strange," she whispered. "That piano was so old and broken, but it still made me believe I could do it." Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Because music isn't about the piano, it's about the person playing it." Later, as the night grew quiet, Emily sat alone by the window. The moonlight touched the piano's surface and the little golden trophy glowed beside it. She ran her fingers lightly across the keys, playing the same melody again, but this time slower, softer. It was no longer a song of fear or doubt. It was a song of strength. The sound floated through the room and out into the night, a message to the world that sometimes the quietest voices have the loudest hearts. The next few weeks after the talent show were like a dream for Emily. Everywhere she went, people seemed to look at her differently. The same students who once ignored her now smiled or waved. Some even stopped to tell her how much they loved her performance. A few teachers congratulated her in the hallways, saying they had never seen a student play with such emotion before. It was strange and new, but it also made her shy. She had never been the center of attention, and though it felt nice, she still didn't quite know how to handle it. At home, the old piano stood proudly in the corner with the small golden trophy placed on top. Her mother polished it carefully every few days as if it were made of diamonds. Sometimes when her mother came home late from work, she would ask Emily to play something just to relax. Emily would smile and play soft tunes until her mother's tired eyes closed. Those were peaceful moments full of quiet love and warmth. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the school office. It was an invitation to perform at a local community event, a small concert where young musicians would showcase their talent in front of city guests. Emily's hands trembled as she held the paper. Her teacher had recommended her name to the organizers after her performance at school. "You should do it," her mother said with pride. "It's a big step and you've earned it." Emily nodded, though a small part of her felt scared. The thought of playing in front of strangers made her stomach twist, but she also knew that this was an opportunity she couldn't ignore. She began to practice every evening after homework. This time, she didn't want to play the same melody from the talent show. She wanted to create something new, something that would tell another story. She spent hours trying different combinations, closing her eyes and listening to how each sound felt. Sometimes the music came easily. Other times it was like chasing a dream that kept slipping away. Still, she didn't stop. Her fingers hurt, but she kept going. Every wrong note only made her more determined to find the right one. One night, as she practiced, she noticed her mother sitting on the couch watching quietly. The small lamp behind her cast a warm glow. "It sounds beautiful," her mother said softly. "What will you call this one?" Emily smiled. "I don't know yet," she replied. "Maybe I'll name it when I finish." Her mother nodded and said, "Whatever you name it, I know it'll come from your heart. That's what people will feel." Days passed and the melody slowly grew. It started as something soft, almost like a whisper. But then it changed, full of strength and brightness. It was about growth, about finding courage when the world seems to doubt you. The music had a piece of her journey inside it, the fear, the loneliness, the triumph. When she finally played it through one full time, she looked up and saw her mother wiping her eyes. "That one's special," she said with a trembling smile. Emily looked at her hands and whispered, "It's called Rising." The night of the community event came faster than she expected. The auditorium was bigger than the one at school, with shining lights and polished wooden floors. The crowd was larger too, full of families, local musicians, and even a few reporters taking pictures. Emily stood backstage holding her hands together, trying to calm the rush in her chest. She peeked out from behind the curtain and saw the audience waiting patiently. Her teacher was there too, standing near the front row with a proud expression. Seeing familiar faces made her feel a little braver. Before her turn, she met other young performers, a boy with a violin, a girl with a flute, and a group that played guitars. They were all kind and encouraging, and it made her feel less alone. One of them said, "You're the one who won your school show, right? I heard about it." Emily blushed a little and nodded. "Yeah, that was me." They smiled and wished her luck. It wasn't a competition this time, but she still wanted to give it her all. When her name was called, she took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The piano stood waiting under the spotlight. She sat down, her fingers hovering just above the keys. The hall went silent. For a moment, she closed her eyes and remembered the old piano at home. The rain tapping against the window. Her mother's note that said, "Play with your heart." Then she began. The first notes of rising filled the air, soft and calm, like the beginning of a sunrise. Slowly, the melody grew stronger. Each sound told a piece of her story. People could feel the honesty in it, the emotion behind every note. Her fingers moved with grace and confidence. The music carried her away, and the audience followed. When she reached the middle part of the piece, her pace quickened, and the notes flowed like fire and light mixed together. Some people leaned forward in their seats. Others closed their eyes, lost in the beauty of the sound. It was not just skill they were hearing, it was feeling. When the final note faded into silence, the crowd stayed still for a heartbeat, and then applause filled the hall. Emily stood and bowed, her face glowing under the lights. It felt unreal. She could see her teacher smiling proudly and her mother clapping with tears in her eyes again. She had done it. She had told her story without saying a single word. After the performance, several people came up to her. A kind-looking man in a suit introduced himself as a music instructor from the city's cultural center. He handed her a small card and said, "You have a gift, young lady. If you ever want to take lessons, come see me. I'd be honored to help you grow." Emily took the card with shaking hands, her heart almost bursting. Her mother thanked him, and he smiled before walking away. It was the first time anyone outside of school had noticed her talent in such a serious way. That night on their way home, Emily sat quietly beside her mother on the bus. The city lights blurred through the window, and the card from the instructor rested in her hand. "Do you think I should go?" she asked softly. Her mother looked at her and said, "If it feels right to you, then yes. You should always follow what makes you feel alive." Emily smiled faintly and whispered, "I think I will." The next week she visited the cultural center. The instructor greeted her warmly and showed her around the music room, a space filled with grand pianos, sheet music, and the soft echo of past performances. It felt magical. When she sat down to play for him, he listened closely, nodding along. After she finished, he said, "You have something special, Emily, not just skill, and you have soul. That can't be taught, but it can be shaped." He offered to teach her advanced techniques and music reading. She accepted happily. From that day forward, Emily's routine changed. She still went to school, helped her mother at home, but after classes she would go to the cultural center to practice and learn. The lessons were challenging. Sometimes she made mistakes, sometimes she felt frustrated, but she kept trying. Her teacher was patient and encouraging, helping her understand not just how to play, but how to express. "Every note," he said once, "is like a word in a sentence. You must make people feel what you mean." Months passed, and Emily grew stronger as a musician. Her hands no longer shook when she played in front of people. She learned to breathe with the rhythm, to let her emotions guide her instead of fear. Slowly, her dreams started to take shape in her mind. She wanted to become a real pianist, to share her music with the world. The thought scared her a little, but it also filled her with excitement. One evening, her teacher gave her a challenge. "There's an upcoming youth music festival," he said. "It's bigger than any performance you've done before. I think you should audition." Emily froze for a second. The idea felt overwhelming. "Do you think I'm ready?" she asked. He smiled. "You're never fully ready, but that's what makes it worth it." She went home that night thinking about his words. Her mother listened quietly as she explained the opportunity. "You've come so far," her mother said gently. "If this is what your heart tells you, then go for it." Emily nodded, her eyes shining with both fear and hope. She looked over at the old piano sitting quietly in the corner, the small golden trophy still shining above it. She touched the keys softly and whispered to herself, "Maybe it's time to take another step." And with that, she began to prepare once more. Not just for another performance, but for a new chapter in her journey, the one that would test everything she had learned and everything she had become. The days began to pass faster as Emily threw herself deeper into music. The lessons at the cultural center became the highlight of her week. Each time she walked through the glass doors, she felt like she was stepping into another world, a place where sound, feeling, and dreams came together. The instructor, who everyone called Mr. Hart, guided her patiently. He didn't just teach her how to play. He helped her understand what music could mean. Music, he told her once, isn't about showing off. It's about sharing what lives inside you. Emily took those words seriously. She practiced after school every single day, even when her fingers were sore or her homework piled up. Sometimes she would stay so late at the center that the janitor had to remind her it was closing time. Still, she never complained. Each note she played felt like another step toward something bigger, a future she was slowly beginning to believe she could have. Her mother watched her proudly, though sometimes she worried too. She would say, "You need to rest, sweetheart. Don't push yourself too hard." But Emily would just smile and reply softly, "I'll rest after one more song." It was never really one more. She was driven by something stronger than exhaustion, a quiet determination that refused to fade. One day, Mr. Hart invited her to stay after class. "I have something to show you," he said. He led her to a small room at the back of the building. Inside was an old grand piano covered in dust but still beautiful. "This belonged to one of my mentors," he explained. "It hasn't been played in years, but I think it's waiting for the right hands." Emily's eyes widened. "May I?" she asked softly. He nodded. She sat down, her hands trembling slightly, and pressed a key. The sound was rich and deep, even with its age. She played a few notes, and soon a melody began to form, gentle, emotional, alive. Mr. Hart listened silently. When she finished, he said quietly, "Yes, it was waiting for you." From that day on, she practiced on that piano. The sound filled the little room like sunlight. She could feel her music becoming more confident, more expressive. Mr. Hart began giving her more advanced lessons, pieces by great composers and exercises to improve her technique. It wasn't easy. There were days she grew frustrated and even cried in silence when she couldn't get something right. But she always came back the next day ready to try again. One afternoon, as she was finishing her practice, Mr. Hart told her about a youth music competition being held in the city. "It's a big event," he said. "Young talents from all over the region come to perform. It's not just about winning. It's about learning to play in front of people who truly understand music. I think you should join." Emily froze for a moment. The word competition made her nervous. "Do you really think I'm ready?" she asked. Mr. Hart smiled gently. "You're more than ready. You just have to believe it." That night she told her mother about the competition. Her mother's eyes filled with pride. "Of course you should do it," she said. "No matter what happens, I'll be there cheering for you." Emily smiled, though she could feel her heart racing. She knew this was her next big test. The next few weeks became a blur of preparation. She chose a piece that was close to her heart, her own composition, Rising, the same one that had touched everyone at the community event. But this time she wanted to make it even more powerful. She reworked the middle section, adding stronger transitions and bolder rhythms. Sometimes she stayed up past midnight repeating the same passage until it sounded just right. Her mother would peek into her room and whisper, "You'll wake the neighbors." But there was always a smile in her voice. As the day of the competition drew near, Emily's nerves began to grow again. The thought of playing in front of judges, professional musicians, and a large audience made her stomach twist. The night before the event, she couldn't sleep. She sat at the piano, playing softly in the dark. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of notes. She whispered to herself, "Just play what you feel. That's all you can do." The morning of the competition arrived bright and cold. Emily and her mother took the bus to the grand concert hall. It was huge, with high ceilings, shining chandeliers, and rows of polished seats that seemed to stretch forever. The stage looked intimidating under the bright lights. Dozens of young musicians filled the backstage area, each one tuning their instruments or rehearsing quietly. Emily felt small among them, but when she looked at her mother in the audience, smiling proudly, her fear softened a little. When her name was called, she took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The grand piano in the center looked elegant and powerful. She bowed politely to the judges and sat down. For a few seconds, she just sat there with her hands resting on the keys, eyes closed. She remembered everything. The old piano at home, her mother's tired smile, the teacher who once told her to keep it simple, and the promise she made to herself to play from the heart. Then she began. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. The melody grew slowly, filled with emotion. Each note carried her story, her struggles, her small victories, her dreams. The audience sat silent, listening closely. As she reached the middle of the piece, her playing became stronger, more confident. The rhythm burst with life. It wasn't just music anymore. It was her heart speaking out loud. Her fingers moved faster, her expression intense. Even the judges seemed to lean forward, captivated. When she reached the final note, the hall fell silent. For a heartbeat, there was no sound at all. Then, as if the room had been waiting to breathe again, the applause began, soft at first, then louder, rising until it filled the hall. Emily stood and bowed deeply. She could see her mother in the crowd, wiping tears from her eyes. Backstage, Mr. Hart met her with a proud smile. "You did it," he said. Emily shook her head softly. "I don't know if I'll win," she whispered. He laughed gently. "Winning isn't the point, Emily. You just played your truth. That's what matters." When the results were announced, Emily didn't expect to hear her name, but she did. She won second place, and the judges praised her performance for its honesty and emotional depth. For a moment, she stood frozen, unable to move. Then she walked to the stage again, accepted her award, and bowed. The applause echoed in her heart. That evening, as they walked home, her mother held her hand tightly. "You made everyone proud today," she said. Emily smiled softly. "I didn't come first," she said. Her mother squeezed her hand and replied, "You came first in what matters. You made people feel something. That's what true music does." That night, Emily sat by her piano again, the award placed beside the little golden trophy from her school days. The two glowed side by side in the dim light. She played quietly, a new melody beginning to form, one that sounded like hope, like beginnings, like dreams yet to come. After the competition, life slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, but something inside Emily had changed. She was no longer the quiet girl who only played music for herself. She had discovered something deeper, a sense of purpose that pushed her to keep going, to see how far her talent could really take her. Each morning before school, she practiced. Each night before bed, she played softly until her eyelids grew heavy. Music had become not just a dream, but a part of her every breath. Mr. Hart often said that true musicians never stop learning, and Emily took his words seriously. After her success at the competition, he introduced her to new forms of music: classical, jazz, and even modern compositions. Some pieces were fast and wild, others gentle and emotional. Emily learned to adapt, to find her own style in between. He told her, "You have the ability to tell stories through your music. That's rare. Don't ever lose that." Her mother continued to support her in every way possible. She saved small amounts from her job so Emily could buy sheet music and attend weekend workshops. There were sacrifices, skipped outings, extra shifts, but her mother never complained. Whenever Emily apologized, she would just smile and say, "You're doing what I never had the chance to do. Keep going." That encouragement meant everything. A few months later, Mr. Hart surprised Emily again. "There's another opportunity," he said during one of their lessons. "A local orchestra is hosting an audition for young pianists. They're looking for someone to perform in their next concert. It's a big deal." Emily stared at him, hardly believing what she heard. "An orchestra?" she whispered. "But I've never played with one before." He smiled. "That's why it's a challenge worth taking." The days that followed were filled with both excitement and nerves. The piece she was given was complicated, a fast-paced concerto that required precision and energy. At first, she struggled to keep up. Her fingers stumbled across the keys and her timing slipped often. There were moments when she wanted to give up. But then she remembered how far she had already come. Each failure became a reason to try harder. She practiced until her wrists ached and her shoulders felt heavy, but she refused to stop. Mr. Hart noticed her exhaustion one evening. "Don't forget," he said gently. "Music isn't just about perfection. It's about feeling. Take breaks. Let your heart breathe, too." Emily nodded, though deep down she knew she wouldn't stop until she was ready. She wanted to make him proud. And more than that, she wanted to prove to herself that she could rise again. The day of the audition arrived sooner than expected. The hall was smaller than the competition venue, but filled with talented musicians. Each one seemed confident and professional. Some carried folders filled with music sheets. Others warmed up on instruments that gleamed under the lights. Emily sat quietly, clutching her notes, trying to steady her heartbeat. She watched others perform before her. Flawless, practiced, skilled. A voice inside whispered, "You don't belong here." But another voice, stronger and calmer, answered, "You've earned your place." When her turn came, she walked to the piano. The conductor nodded for her to begin. She took a deep breath and started to play. The first few seconds were shaky, her hands trembling slightly, but then something shifted. The sound of the orchestra behind her wrapped around her notes like waves meeting shore. She found the rhythm, the emotion, the story. The hall seemed to fade away. It was only her, the piano, and the music. When she finished, there was silence for a few seconds, followed by polite applause. The conductor smiled, thanked her, and asked her to wait outside. Emily walked off stage, unsure of what to think. Had she done enough? Did they like her performance? The uncertainty twisted her stomach. She sat quietly in the corner until the auditions were over. Finally, the conductor came out and called her name. "Emily," he said with a warm smile, "you played beautifully. You have something rare, feeling. We'd like you to join us for the concert next month." Emily blinked, barely believing what she heard. "Really?" she asked softly. "Yes," he replied. "You've earned it." When she told her mother, she was met with happy tears and a long, proud hug. "See," her mother said, "you belong on that stage." Emily smiled, though her heart was pounding with nervous excitement. She knew the real challenge was just beginning. The weeks leading up to the concert were intense. Rehearsals took hours each day, sometimes late into the evening. She had to adjust her timing to match the orchestra, learn cues from the conductor, and memorize new dynamics. It was harder than anything she had done before, but she loved it. The other musicians treated her kindly, though many were older and more experienced. Some offered advice. Others simply smiled when she got a difficult passage right. Slowly, she began to feel part of something bigger, a team, a harmony greater than herself. One night after rehearsal, she and her mother walked home under the streetlights. The city was quiet, the air cool. "Do you ever get scared?" her mother asked suddenly. Emily thought for a moment and nodded. "All the time," she admitted. "But I think it's a good kind of scared. It means I care." Her mother smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Then never stop caring," she said softly. "Because that's what makes you special." When the concert day arrived, Emily woke early. She could barely eat breakfast. Her hands shook slightly as she buttoned her dress. Her mother helped her tie her hair and whispered, "Just play the way you always do and from your heart." At the concert hall, the stage looked larger than ever, filled with the glow of lights and the buzz of anticipation. The audience was dressed formally, and the sound of quiet chatter filled the air. Emily stood backstage, taking slow breaths as the orchestra tuned. Then it was time. She walked onto the stage with calm determination. The conductor gave her a reassuring nod, then raised his baton. The first notes began, and strings brass, then piano. Emily's hands moved gracefully, her timing perfect, her sound blending and soaring through the hall. The music was alive, powerful, and moving. Every note felt like a heartbeat, every pause like a breath. When her solo section arrived, she poured everything she had into it. All her years of practice, every late night, every word of encouragement from her mother and Mr. Hart. As the final note echoed and faded, the hall erupted in applause. People stood clapping loudly. Emily bowed deeply, her heart racing with relief and joy. The conductor smiled proudly, and the other musicians nodded in quiet approval. It was a moment she would never forget, not because of the applause, but because she finally felt like she belonged there. After the concert, Mr. Hart met her backstage with a bouquet of flowers. "I knew you could do it," he said softly. "You've grown so much." Her mother joined them, tears shining in her eyes. "You were incredible," she whispered. Emily smiled, holding their hands tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. That night, as she lay in bed, the sound of the applause still echoed in her mind. For the first time, she didn't wonder if she was good enough. She knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, she knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of her story, and the music inside her had only begun to speak. Months passed, and the memories of the orchestra concert remained bright in Emily's heart. Every time she thought about that night, the lights, the music, the applause, she felt a quiet spark inside her, one that reminded her how far she had come. But she also knew she couldn't stop there. Each performance was only a step, and her dream stretched far beyond the small city she called home. She wanted to study music properly, to learn from the best teachers, to explore the world of sound even deeper. But dreams like that were expensive, and she knew her mother had already given up so much. Still, she didn't give up. Between school, rehearsals, and her part-time work at the bookstore, she practiced whenever she could. Sometimes, when her mother was asleep, she would play quietly in the dark, the faint glow of a lamp shining on the piano keys. Each melody she played carried a piece of her hope. She had started writing more of her own music. Small pieces at first, then longer ones filled with emotion and rhythm. She wrote about what she knew, her struggles, her small joys, her love for her mother, and her belief that music could change a person's world. One evening, while she was practicing, Mr. Hart stopped by the cultural center. He listened silently from the doorway until she finished. "You've come a long way," he said softly. "Have you thought about applying for the Music Academy?" Emily froze. The National Music Academy. It was a dream she had never dared to speak aloud. "I don't think I could afford it," she said quietly. Mr. Hart smiled. "There are scholarships. They don't just look for talent. They look for heart, and you have that more than anyone I've ever taught." That night, Emily sat by her window, unable to sleep. The idea both excited and scared her. The academy meant leaving home, stepping into a world where everyone would be extraordinary. What if she wasn't good enough? But when she looked at her piano and thought of how far she had come, from that first simple melody she was told to play to the fiery performances that moved people to tears, she whispered to herself, "I've worked too hard to stop now." Over the next few weeks, she prepared for the academy auditions. The requirements were tough. She had to play 2 classical pieces and 1 original composition. She chose one of her favorite pieces by Chopin and another by Beethoven, both technically demanding yet full of feeling. But it was her own composition, the one she called "The Fire Within," that she poured her heart into. It was fast, emotional, and full of the energy that had carried her through her journey. She practiced every day until the music became part of her. The day of the audition arrived on a gray, windy morning. Her mother came with her to the city, holding her hand tightly as they walked up the steps of the Grand Academy building. The marble floors and tall ceilings made Emily feel small again, but she straightened her back and smiled. She wasn't that scared girl from years ago anymore. She was ready to try. Inside the audition hall, there were only a few judges, a grand piano, and silence. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began. Her fingers moved with grace, confidence, and emotion. The classical pieces went smoothly, each note strong and precise. When it came time for her own composition, she closed her eyes and let her heart take over. The melody started softly, then built into something wild and alive. Every note carried a story out of struggle, of hope, of love. The room seemed to hold its breath. When she finished, there was a long silence before one of the judges finally smiled and said, "Thank you. That was it." The rest was waiting. The days that followed were slow. Emily tried to keep herself busy, but the thought of the results lingered in her mind. One afternoon, she came home from school and found her mother standing at the door, holding an envelope with the Academy's seal. Emily's heart nearly stopped. She opened it carefully, her hands trembling. As her eyes scanned the letter, her mouth fell open. "I got in," she whispered. Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her tightly. "You did it," she said, her voice shaking with pride. "You really did it." When she told Mr. Hart, he smiled warmly. "I knew this day would come," he said. "Remember, Emily, and this is not the end of your journey. It's the beginning of something even greater." The months that followed were full of change. Emily moved to the city and began her studies at the academy. The first few weeks were overwhelming. Everyone around her seemed talented beyond measure. The lessons were tough, the practice hours long, and sometimes she felt lost in the sea of sound. But then she would remember her mother's words. "Just play from your heart." So she did. Slowly, she found her place. She met other students who shared her love for music. They practiced together, helped each other, and even performed in small student concerts. Emily began writing more of her own music, inspired by her new surroundings. One of her teachers noticed her compositions and encouraged her to submit them to a national music contest. Hesitant but hopeful, she entered, not expecting much. Weeks later, she was called to perform her piece live at a young composer's showcase. The event was filled with professionals, teachers, and critics. Standing backstage, Emily could feel her heart pounding like a drum. But as she walked onto the stage, the nerves melted away. She played her piece, Home, a soft and emotional melody that captured everything she felt. Her journey, her love for her mother, and her gratitude to everyone who had believed in her. The audience listened in complete silence. When she finished, they rose to their feet and clapped until her eyes filled with tears. She didn't just win that night. She earned respect, recognition, and a promise for the future. Her piece was selected to be performed by a national orchestra, and she was invited to work with some of the country's most respected musicians. For the first time, Emily realized that her story, the girl who was once told to play a simple melody, had reached people far beyond what she could have imagined. When she returned home a few months later for a short visit, she found her mother sitting on the old couch, the same soft smile on her face. "So," her mother said teasingly, "Miss Academy musician, how does it feel?" Emily laughed and sat beside her. "It feels unreal," she said softly, "but every time I sit at a piano it feels like coming home." Her mother squeezed her hand and whispered, "That's because your heart never left." Later that evening, Emily walked to the community center, the same place where it all began. The lights were dim, and the old piano Mr. Hart had given her lessons on still stood in the corner. She sat down and ran her fingers across the keys. It felt the same, warm, familiar, comforting. She began to play, not for an audience, not for judges, not for fame, but for the simple love of it. The melody filled the quiet hall, rising and falling like a heartbeat. It was gentle at first, then strong and fiery, a reflection of everything she had become. As the final note faded into silence, Emily smiled. She remembered the day she was told to play a simple piano melody. Back then it had felt like the start of something small, but now she knew. It was the moment that changed everything. It was the beginning of her story, one that had turned into a masterpiece not because of perfection, but because it was played from the heart. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end. The world was still waiting for her next song.